Why can you not be the best writer in the world and still be successful? Why do your errors matter less than you probably think? Because the reader exists. We're going to be talking about that today. Welcome to How to Write Good. I am your host, Daniel Poppie. You can find out more about me at danielpoppie.com. If it is your first time here, How to Write Good is a writing podcast that seeks to find principles and advice that can be applied across a broad range of writing situations. If you've been here before, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button below, and share. If you are going to write, and what I mean by that is if you're going to make writing a significant part of your life, it's going to play a prominent role, I believe it is important to know how the readers interact with writing. And if you're not making writing a large portion of your life, I still think it's important that you know how readers interact with writing, because writing is a very important part of life. Writing will get you pretty far, because if you can write, you can understand how to read specific things. And if you can read, you can teach yourself things. And if you can write well, if you can write clearly, you can communicate clearly. And if you can communicate clearly, it's going to be better for you in the long run, because clear communication is important. And honestly, clear communication is important even if you're deceiving someone. Though I don't recommend you deceiving someone. But there are people in the world who can clearly communicate, but they don't clearly communicate because their intention is to deceive another person. And they can better deceive someone if they understand what clear communication is, so they can twist their deception to deceive someone better, if that makes sense. But if you are going to write, if you want writing to be a big part of your life, if you want to be a writer or an author, it is important to know how the reader interacts with the writing itself. We should know what the process of reading is. And people don't often think about this, right? It is often the case that when you write or when you put something out into the world, people think, who are you writing for? Correct? We do have this idea of who are you writing for? We do have this idea that if you're selling a product, you have a specific person you're trying to sell that product to. I can't remember the exact terminology that's used for that specific person, but what you are told to do is to imagine a very specific type of person, who they are, how old they are, what gender they are, where they work, what they like to do with their free time, what they buy, etc. And the same is for writers as well. You need to know who you're writing to in some sort of sense. And if you can have a better understanding of who you're writing for, or what person is going to read your book, you are going to be able to write in a way that is going to attract them. And then they're going to grab your book, they're going to love your book, they're going to spread your book. And that's the goal of someone who's going out and doing writing. You want people to actually read your work. Now, there are other goals to writing, but that's generally the goal. People write books so that people can read the book. You have an experience, you put that experience down on the piece of paper, and then the other person reads that. They have the experience as well, and they love that experience that moves them in some way. So we already have this idea embedded into the idea of writing, right? Know who you're writing for, know your audience, because if you know your audience, you're not going to write too low or too high for your audience, right? Your writing is not going to be too difficult or too easy. I'm not going to write a children's book for adults. I am not going to write a scientific paper for someone who doesn't understand the scientific method whatsoever, right? Or research whatsoever. I'm going to be writing for people. I'm going to be writing in a specific way for a specific group of people. But what is often forgotten, actually I've never heard it said, what is forgotten? I'm not even going to have often when I say this. What is forgotten is how reading works. Readers think too. There's a process for reading. Readers think too, and when we are writing, we need to understand how readers think so that we can write most effectively to connect to those readers. I think that the best way to understand how a reader works or how a reader thinks is to analyze your own reading and how you interact with writing itself, because you have the most time with yourself. It is difficult to force someone to sit down and read and tell you what they think. Because if they do that, you're not just getting how they process stuff when they're reading, you're actually getting how they understand how they're processing things, if that makes sense. So it goes through a layer of understanding first before it gets to you. But readers think too, right? And we need to understand that. We need to understand that we don't have to explain absolutely everything to our readers. If you say there's a pen on the table, you don't necessarily have to explain what the pen is. And I would actually, in most cases, recommend that you don't, because in a lot of cases, people don't find that interesting. That is a very ordinary thing in their life. And unless you have a very specific, unique, visceral way of describing a pen on a table, people are not going to enjoy it. But I want you to take this idea away that readers think too. They bring their own pattern of thinking to reading. And this is why book tastes seem so subjective. Everybody has their own experiences. Everybody has a specific level of reading ability. Everybody has a specific level of cognitive ability. Certain people think more slowly. I'm not saying that they're less intelligent. I'm saying they think more slowly. Certain people think more quickly. There's all these different things that go into this. People live in different regions. People speak different languages, or they have a second language, and that'll affect how they read things and how they see things. People have gone to other countries. People have had difficult things happen in their life, right? There are certain things that are unique to people's lives, and there are certain things that are the same. But whatever those experiences and things are, they're bringing them to the reading. So reading and writing, reading is subjective. The book quality, I don't think a book's quality is necessarily subjective. That's something I need to think about more, and maybe I'll have an episode on that in the future. But I know people say, oh, it is subjective whether someone will like your book or not. But a book's quality, or the quality of writing, I don't think is subjective. I think that you can go in and you can read a book and you can see whether the writing is good, and you can dislike the book for a lot of different reasons, if that makes sense. And I think you can go in, you can read the book, you can see whether the storytelling is good, and then you can dislike the book for a lot of different reasons that are legitimate reasons. So the writing remains the same. It's the person interacting with the writing, and that's what changes the perception of what they're doing. And that actually brings us into another thing. So we're not going to be talking about people disliking your work today. We are going to be talking about how this idea that the reader actually thinks and the reader actually processes stories and processes your writing, how that is actually a good thing for you and how it can benefit you. Now, people put things together automatically. They see something and they see it as a whole in a lot of cases. They don't see it as discrete parts. So for example, if it's constructed in the right way, that's what I mean. So for example, you have this idea of a bicycle. If I look at a bicycle and it's been put together in the way a bicycle is meant to be put together, right? It's not a bicycle if it isn't, but if it's put together in the correct way, I will see a bicycle and I will perceive a bicycle as a whole. Now I can focus on the smaller parts, but if I look at it as a whole, my mind I don't have to put those parts together. I just instantly know it is a bicycle. And this is just how people work. They put a lot of things together automatically. You can think about this in your own life, right? If we had to take in all the little bits and pieces and then construct that thing consciously, it would be very difficult. But we jump to the larger view of the thing. We jump to the whole view of that thing. This idea of people putting things together automatically is very important, right? People create patterns automatically, and you can see this when somebody is looking at clouds and they see things they know. They see faces, they see rabbits, they see elephants, etc. What they do also is put together sentences, thoughts, descriptions. Anything that is within writing, they will put together if they understand what they are reading, if that makes sense. So if you have someone who is a child and they are reading your work and they don't understand, they don't have the sophistication, they are not old enough, they don't know how to read well enough, so they cannot take in all the information and process it properly, they are not going to be able to understand your writing. But if a person who is capable of reading your work, they have a high enough reading level, if we want to say that reading has levels, that's kind of a weird thought, they have a high enough reading ability, and they have knowledge of the things you're talking about, they are engaged with the culture that is They know your culture well enough, or you two have enough culture in common to understand one another. They are going to fill in the gaps, right? They are going to take the sentences, they're going to take the thoughts you presented, they're going to take the descriptions, and they are going to create a larger picture of those things. And I think this is really important because a lot of times I run into writing that has too much. And there's this idea that you should omit unneeded things within your writing, and to a certain degree that can go overboard. People can take that idea, and I think that it's correct, because if it's unneeded, then you should get rid of it, right? By definition, if it's unneeded, we should get rid of it. But at the same time, people go overboard with that, and they should be careful that they're not cutting out things that you actually should keep in your writing. But what this helps with is with people who put too much in their writing. If I describe, like I said before, if I describe every little bit of a pen, the person who is reading is going to fall asleep. Some people will describe an entire meal that a character is eating. In a lot of cases, it is irrelevant. Now, you can make pretty much anything relevant within the context of a story, but at the same time, if it's trying to set the picture of what's going on, if you're trying to give people a sense of place or emotion, etc., having every little detail is actually not to your benefit, because a person can only process so many things at once. So what you'll do is you will describe all these things that are supposed to give a picture of a place, or they're supposed to give a visceral feeling, because that's what it really is. When we experience things, it isn't just experiencing all the little details. We are experiencing something on an emotional level, right? If you look at out at a vista, from a vista, you are seeing a landscape spreading before you, but you're not seeing all the details of the landscape. You might see little specific details and attach onto them, but you're not seeing all the details at once, if that makes sense. You're not able to actually process all the details at once. But what's important with that is you have an emotional response to that, and all the different experiences in our lives. Within all those different experiences, we don't have all the details, but we do have an emotional response to them, and there are certain things that we attach to that experience, right? There are certain things that we know, that we remember, and those things are emotionally charged. And a lot of writing is trying to take something physical, describe that physical thing, and express it to people in a way that they will connect to it emotionally. That's why people read books, because they want to connect to it emotionally. Sometimes they're connecting to the characters. In a lot of good books, they'll be connecting to the characters on a really deep level. In other times, they're carried along by the story, and they're connected through the emotions of the story. And that's really the point of this, right? So you don't have to be the best writer in the world to have this happen. You do not have to put in all the different pieces of information about something. If you make mistakes, and the person who is reading is giving your work a shot, and you're halfway decent, and you're trying your best to present those ideas, and you're trying your best to be clear with what you're trying to present, right? If you're saying, hey, I want to express this emotion, or I want to show this happening, etc., and you're trying to do it clearly, the reader is still interacting with what's happening, right? The better the writing, the less they're going to see the writing. That's really how I judge writing when I read it. If I see the writing when I read it, it's not as good. If I notice the writing, I know that there are errors in that writing, or I'm just in a really bad mood or something like that. But if I'm in a good mood, if I'm in the mood to read, and I am reading, and I notice the writing and it gets in the way of me reading, then there are errors within that writing. The writing should fall away, right, in the end. But even if you're not the best writer, the person who is reading it is filling in the gaps. Even if you mess up, the person who is reading it will take the information they already have in their minds, because their ability to imagine is possibly more powerful than yours, right? I've seen writers who say, oh, somebody like described something in my book. They're like, oh, I really like this. I really like this idea. And the writer was like, oh, I'm kind of sad because I wish I would have had that vivid of an idea of what I was writing. And that's the cool thing about it. And so I don't think people should worry too much. I think you should try your best, definitely, but I think that you should let the worry fall away, because even if there are errors in your book, the reader comes along and the reader engages with that book. And if you've done your best and you have errors, you've still done your best, right? If that makes sense. If you've done your best and you've had errors, you've still done your best, and you need to move away from that book at some point. And if there's any value in that book, the reader is going to find that value. And that's where I'm going to leave you with today. The reader will fill in the gaps of your writing. The reader will fill in the gaps of things you don't tell them. The reader will fill in the gaps of issues you have possibly with the plot. The reader will fill in the gaps of things that you just messed up with and you didn't see at all. Now, this is not a permission, I guess, even though you should just do what you want and do what you think is best. I don't think you should see this as permission for failing to write or not trying your best. I think this is permission to try things, do your best, and if you do fail, you can move on and you can learn from what you did before. If you enjoyed this podcast and you want to support me, there's really one simple thing you can do. You can go to danielpoppie.com/newsletter and sign up for my newsletter. And when you sign up, you'll actually be able to get access to my publication roadmap. So that's everything I have planned for pretty much every project I have into the next decade. Again, that is danielpoppie.com/newsletter. You can also find the link below.